Welcome to West Springfield, Massachusetts. We're at the Eastern States Exposition, the Big E, the largest fair of its kind in the Northeast and the fifth largest in the entire United States. This is one of several entrances to the fair, and we're starting pretty much in the middle of the fairground. It's very large, and I want to point out some landmarks as we go along so you can sort of tell where you are in the fair. So right here is the Court of Honor stage, which we'll be coming back to a little later. Behind it is the Coliseum, which we'll be seeing later. Straight down this street here is the Midway, and then on to the left of that is the Storrow building, which is otherwise known at the Big E as the Farmerama. So we're going to make a sort of clockwise motion around the fairgrounds. The Flag Plaza you see in front of us has the 6 flags of New England, plus the U.S. flag, a Big E flag, and the Canadian flag. Basically, the Eastern States Exposition is a giant flea market. There are vendors that sell pretty much every conceivable device that you could use or maybe not use, and you'll see examples of that as we go along here. There's also an enormous amount of food and an incredible variety of food. Everything from fried Oreos and fried cheesecake and literally fried butter to turkey legs and all sorts of stuff. This huge building on the right is the Better Living Center. And there's some martinis. They actually have fried martinis too. But the Better Living Center is the largest building on the complex, and it's part of the giant flea market. This whole area you probably would barely recognize from another video I did of the Amherst Railway Hobby Show that's run every year. It's the largest model railroad show in the area, and it uses the same location. So over there is Jelly Belly Pools and Spas, selling dozens and dozens of spas. But what we're going to do is we're going to cut through the Better Living Center just to give you an idea of how massive this place is and the types of stuff they sell. Over on the left, you can see where it says mac and cheese and cheddar melts. That's a local concession, the Granville Country Store, and it has the best macaroni and cheese in the fair. And this is one of those videos where I wish I had a 360-degree camera mounted on my head so that you could just look around yourself as we're walking along. There's so much to see, it's overwhelming. But as you can see, there's everything from cable providers to lounge chairs to massage therapists to craft people to jewelry to anything you can imagine you'll find in here. The name of the Better Living Center is really a relic of the 1950s and 60s, when this was filled with all sorts of vendors who were trying to make your life easier, like for homemakers in the kitchen, all sorts of gadgets like mops and knives and all that stuff. And you still find a lot of that, but there are also a lot of other things like grandfather clocks and pianos and organs, and as you can see down the way here, there's even a ride simulator. So it's a real mishmash of all sorts of stuff in here. And besides the occasional outside food vendor that you'll find in here, there are also a couple of little cafes. You can see one coming up here in front of us, and I think there's a Dunkin' Donuts down the other end, so there are lots of places to eat and drink in here as well. So we'll head back outside now. We're at the end of that street that we were looking at the start of this video. And these big yellow tents in front of us are circus animals. So for kids it's great. There's an elephant ride and a camel ride and lots of little things to interest the kids.
Your top salespeople are in the middle of Maine. I'm out here with Karen the elephant over to your right, and that's Roosevelt the camel. Those are, I just gave Karen her oranges.
We're now in the far northeast corner of the fairgrounds. You just saw another entrance over there on the left. And this white and red tent in front of us is a circus that they have. Here are some displays of tractors that you'll find at various places around the fairgrounds. One of the few remaining ties to its agricultural roots. Poutine is a Canadian delicacy of French fries, gravy, and cheese. There's the entrance to the circus. And they have 3 shows daily. So now we're heading south along this route. Notice that there really aren't a lot of people. That's because I purposely got to the fairgrounds before it opened so that I wouldn't be mobbed. These fairgrounds become so congested with people you can barely walk through them. The fair usually runs for about 2.5 weeks. They tried a 3.5 week schedule and that didn't last long. So usually 2.5 weeks is the maximum. And almost every day is packed. I got here purposely early so that I would be able to walk through without having to struggle. Otherwise, this video would have taken twice as long to make. But as you see later on in the video, you're going to see it gets a little more congested as people start drifting in. So there's the back end of the Better Living Center. There's Yankee Boy, where you can have some delicious kangaroo burgers. Yankee Boy's been there a long time. It's one of the permanent buildings for food concessions. There are more spas and more tractors. Bear country. You'll find a lot of these animal exhibits all throughout the fairgrounds as well. You know, in addition to things like bear country, there's the world's smallest horse, the world's largest horse, the world's fattest pig, the world's tiniest pig, all that stuff.
Midway is a great day for solar. With clean earth energy. Visit our display in Craft Commons, located in Storrow Village, or our professionals in the Better Living Center, Green Earth Energy.
Over on the right here is one of the information booths at the park. All of these buildings look fairly similar, so you'll be able to identify them, and they're scattered throughout the fairgrounds. Now we're reaching the south end of the fairgrounds. Over here on the right is the Young Building, which is also the international building for the fair. But I want to take a little detour over here and head toward the Mallary Building, which is a livestock building. A lot of beautiful plantings around the fairgrounds as well. These little bare trees that you see are, as you can tell, LED lights, and they all light up purple in the evening. There are also lots and lots of sheds on display, a lot of Amish furniture on display. And of course, spas. Can't get enough of spas. Straight ahead is yet another entrance to the Big E. And here's the formal entrance to the Mallary Building. The bleachers you see over here on the right are set up for the Swifty Swine Show, which is a little racing pig show. Over here on the left is a beautiful display of award-winning Christmas trees. And you can see some wreaths there in the background as well. And then over here is the annual butter sculpture. A sculpture made out of butter and wire. Every year it's something different. And you can actually, early in the fair, you can see the sculptor working on it inside that chilled building there. So here we go into the Mallary building. Livestock and more. And cows. Lots of cows. Over here on the right is an area where there are animal judging competitions. As you can see, the building's pretty large, and when we get past here, you'll see it'll split off to the left and right. You'd think that would give kids nightmares, seeing all the food inside the refrigerator talking and singing, but the kids seem to like it. So here are lots of sheep and alpacas, and over here are more areas where the livestock is usually kept. So we're not going to walk all the way through here. We'll just double back. Oh, and over here on the left is an area where they actually milk the cows. You can see they have all these bleachers set up for people to watch the judging competitions, and those benches are usually filled. People seem to enjoy that. So let's walk through here. Outside over on the right is a row of antique tractors that are set up for display purposes. And that takes us to the southeast corner of the fairgrounds. There's the Coliseum in front of us, the Midway over on the left, sponsored by North American Amusements, and over on the right is the Young Building, or the International Building. And that's what we're going to do, is we're going to go into the International Building to show you what's in there. As you might expect, it's more vendors. And there are some more tractors. The International Building does have something more than vendors, though. This is usually the building where the Big East sets up some sort of display. Like last year it was pinball and arcade machines. This year, because it's the 100th anniversary of the Big E, there's a whole display featuring the history of the Big E. So let's walk through and take a look at that. And this over here is a recreation of Storrow Village. which is part of the expo grounds, which we'll be seeing later. There are old historic buildings that were saved and then put to reuse in the fairgrounds. So that was the exhibit, and we'll continue on our way. You can see the Heroes and Legends Cafe down the end there. That's another indoor eatery. Now here is one of my favorite exhibits at the fair this year. Metal spinners, lots of them. That sailboat one up there on the right, I actually bought one of those. Gorgeous pieces of spinning art. And as you can see, there still aren't many people wandering through, which is good, because again, these aisles just become packed with people as the day goes on. This sort of thatched roof that you can see over here is a sort of Irish-themed gift shop. And there's a little Irish pub set up over there. So let's head back outside now and over across to the Storrow building, where we'll find Farmerama. And there are some Clydesdale horses that room in that building during the fair. There's the Better Living Center straight up there in front of us. And there are a lot of the typical agricultural displays in this building. So there are, you know, goats, and there are also displays that children have made and adults have made of fruit and vegetables and landscaping displays. This is the typical country fair section of the Big E. So we have some landscaping displays over here, and then around the corner are some pumpkins and squash done up to look like characters you might recognize. And some more landscaping displays over here. And this is one of the most popular displays at the fair, the chick hatchery. Usually people are about 10 deep standing around this thing looking in. And again, kids especially love watching this. And we had singing dairy before, so you got to get all your food groups in. So here are some singing vegetables. Okay, you get the idea. That's Farmerama. Now, directly in front of us is the Coliseum. And the Coliseum is a massive arena, which used to host a lot of musical acts. And now, during the fair, it's this big dirt area that's used for horse shows, and right now what you're watching is a dog show. So the dogs have to go through all these hurdles and perform different tricks, and then they're all judged accordingly. But look at the size of this place. There's actually an organ in here that's played during the horse shows, so the horses have some rhythm to trot along to. So that's the Coliseum. So this street that we're on here is the one we saw when we came into the park at the beginning of the video. There's the main Midway entrance directly in front of us, and over on the left is the International Food Court. And there's an enormous number of food offerings in there. There's a place to sit down and eat inside there. And it has, in my opinion, the best deal in the park. Over on the right is an Indian food place where you can get really good Indian food for almost no money. That's the Mallary building that we just came from, way at the end there. And off in the distance you can see the Sea Barn, which we'll talk about in a little bit, and also the steeple of one of the state buildings. You can also see on the right a pig roast there. Hopefully it's not one from the Speedy Swine Show. So now let's take a walk down through the Midway. There's that Indian cuisine place I was talking about. There are lots of places to park at the Big E. In fact, it's sort of a cottage industry in West Springfield. People will park you at their homes, on their lawns, for like $5, $10. And the price varies depending on how crowded it is. So the more crowded, the more expensive it becomes. But all through the area you can find places that you can park if you don't mind walking. We were just looking at a Kittyland area there. That's sort of a precursor to the actual Midway. Now, the Midway itself is not open yet. As I said, I was there early in the morning, and this was going to be opening up at 11 o'clock. So things are pretty quiet, but you'll get an idea of how big it is and the type of rides they have. Lots of games, of course. So let's make a clockwise sweep around the Midway. Of course, since it's a fair, there are plenty of spin and barf rides. And beer pong. I mean, what a great family entertainment. The ride on the right there is generically known as a Gravitron. There's the Freakout, a Funhouse. This area right here for many, many years used to have a very large portable flume ride, a log flume. But in a New England October and September, not a lot of takers for a flume ride when the temperature's in the 50s and 60s. We're now at the far south end of the fairground. Now, if you remember when we walked through the International Building and you saw the exhibit of the Big E's history, you saw a race car there. And that's because this area we're walking on used to be a very popular racetrack at one time. They had auto races dating all the way back through, I think, the 1940s. But now they just use it as the place to set up the Midway. And this row here that we're on has all the fun houses all lined up. And there's a flying scooter ride. You can see the roller coaster in the distance. This thing is really popular. Never get me on it, but people line up for it all day long. And the typical Matterhorn, another fun house there. The roller coaster that you see is pretty much a stock. They call them Zyklon or Galaxy coasters. They had for quite a while a spinning Wild Mouse coaster by Zamperla, and that was really popular. But that's probably the biggest ride at this Midway. And here's a second Ferris wheel. And again, things are still pretty sleepy. Not much action right now, but it'll be popping in an hour or so. In front of us, on the right, is the Coliseum again. And to the left is Sea Barn. It's a giant barn. There are 4 barns, all with letters, and they're basically for the animals and the trainers, so the public usually doesn't go into the barns. Now I have to take a detour over here and show you this booth. It's new this year, and it has cheese on a stick. Real cheese on a stick. The only place that has cheese on a stick left that I know of is Cedar Point in Ohio. So to have real cheese on a stick this close to my home made me very, very happy. Now let's continue moving this way. We're going westerly along this road. Like most fairs of this type, the Big E has continued to evolve over the years. The Big E, in fact, as a name, only happened about 30, 40 years ago. It started to be called that. It was always known as the Eastern States Exposition. But the way this fair has evolved from when I was a child is basically with more vendors. There used to be a lot more exhibits. I remember going through RV exhibits and tractor exhibits, and they had tractor pulls like a lot of places did. And it's become much more commoditized over the years. For instance, in front of us is one of the Lions Club eateries. This is a huge one, and it's for the Agawam Lions Club. And they have all sorts of food in this place. And this is the entrance to the Xfinity Arena, which is a big concert arena that has huge acts that play there throughout the Big E's run. And over here is the West Springfield Lions Club eatery. So they have the two Lions Clubs opposite each other. And again, lots of different types of food there. The low building in front of us is another one of the barns. And now we are on the Avenue of the States at the far west end of the Fairgrounds. And if you need turkey legs, here are some giant turkey legs, and they are huge. They're the size of a small child. So let's walk down the Avenue of States. Now this area is normally so congested with people. It's like if you've ever been in one of those ball pits as a child where you have all these balls that you're trying to swim through. It's sort of like that, but with people. Again, luckily we're here early in the day, so it's not a big deal, but you will encounter enormous numbers of people during a normal day here. This is the New England Grange building. Again, originally for agriculture, but if you go inside, it's mostly a craft fair now and there. From here, it was a difficult decision as to where to go because there's more streets and vendors all throughout this way over here, but at the same time there's also the Avenue of the States, and everything sort of comes to a head at this point. There are all sorts of intersecting paths all over the place. But I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take you not down this place right now. We'll swing around back to it, and instead what I want to do is take you through all the state buildings. So let's turn around and go back, and we'll come back to this section of Midway later. There really is no rhyme or reason for how these buildings were put in. Well, there is a rhyme or reason. Some buildings were put in first, some were put in later, and they spanned about 20 years in construction. So they're not put by geographical area, they're not placed, in any logical area. It's just they were put there when there was room to put them and when they were built. So we're going to start over here with the last building on the Avenue of the States, which is the Rhode Island building. Originally, the state buildings, and there are a lot of them and they're beautifully built, they were designed to show off what each of the state's specialties were. So when I was a kid, for instance, you would go into the Massachusetts building and there was a giant fish pond where you could actually fish with fishing poles. In the New Hampshire building, there was a giant ski slope where you could actually ski. I mean, really interesting stuff like that. But, as you might expect, over the years, these have evolved to be more places for vendors to set up their wares. Luckily, most of the time, the vendors are actually from that particular state, so it's, marginally showing off what each of the states can do. These buildings were not built to hold the crowds that are currently at the Big E. The Big E now has pushing 1 million and a half people every year going through, so it gets really congested. But you can see in the Rhode Island building we have seafood, we have clam cakes, and we have chowders, and stuff that you would associate with Rhode Island. We walk out the back here, and there actually have begun to move a lot of these state buildings and expand them with picnic tables and places for people to go, because there simply is not enough room anymore within the actual buildings. Some of them, as you're going to see, actually built these tents onto the back and added more stuff into the tents. So we're just going to swing in and out of these buildings. We're not going to spend a lot of time in them, but it'll give you a sense of what they're like. So, from Rhode Island, we'll head over to the Massachusetts building, the next one in line. And you can see Friendly's, which is a Massachusetts institution. And there is chili, and that is really good chili. So, come to the Massachusetts building, try some of the chili, and then hop over to Friendly's next door and get a milkshake so you can cool your mouth off. And over here, Massachusetts is selling some lobster rolls. They're not as sweet as the ones in the Maine building, which we'll get to in a little bit. So as you can see, the Massachusetts building is pretty big, but we're not going to go through all that. You can also see that the buildings are starting to get a little more crowded now. And before we move on to the next building, I definitely want to stop over here. This organ that you see in front of us, a Stinson organ, the Big E had it commissioned especially for them. The organ was originally positioned right at the front of the park as you enter, but when they expanded the Court of Honor stage, they moved it to the back end of the park. So that's where you find it. And that takes you out to the actual Avenue of the States. On our left is another one of the big entrances . So the next building we have on the menu here is the Maine building. And there's lots of delicious stuff in here, including Karen's favorite lobster rolls. There's some blueberry pie, and there's the lobster roll booth. And in front of us is Wicked Whoopies, which has phenomenal whoopie pies. They're giant. They're the lobster rolls. And then in front of us over here, we're going to try to muscle our way through. You can see the crowds are starting to get a bit thick. Is the Maine potato area. And everybody feels that's a tradition at the Big E, that you have to stop and get a Maine potato. There are now lots and lots of places to get baked potatoes because this one became so famous. And people will line up for up to an hour in line waiting to get a Maine baked potato. But there's one place that I really want you to see, which is up over here on the left. You can can see that big fish over on the left. That is smoked salmon. Sebastian smoked salmon is incredible. They often will run out of stock before the fair is over. You know, it doesn't sound that exciting, but it is so delicious. It has like a smoked barbecue flavor, and it's salmon on a stick. So I highly recommend that. So we'll move out of this building and then head for the next one in the row, the Vermont building. And every year we're finding more and more concessions are set up outside the buildings because the buildings simply don't have enough room to hold everything anymore. And as you might expect, two big draws to the Vermont building are cheese and maple everything. Maple candy, maple syrup.
Vermont building's my favorite.
You're in the wrong, going wrong.
Yeah.
Now we'll head over to the Connecticut building. And those cider donuts are really tasty.
What was the other one?
You want to sit and have some milk?
You want to sit down? Watch out.
I'm trying.
And as you can see, things are starting to get pretty congested now. So we'll just muscle our way through here and go out to the next building, the final one in the row, which is the New Hampshire building. The soups that you see in front of you are really good. But I want to show you something at the back. So let me see if I can make it through this thickening crowd and get you to the back of this building. Here we go.
Oh, yeah. You really gotta get
There's a small stage where New Hampshire musicians play throughout the day. And now we're out in the back of the building, and over here is kettle corn. And it's really good kettle corn. In fact, that was some of my first kettle corn I ever had was from the New Hampshire building. And since then, lots and lots of other vendors popped up selling kettle corn everywhere. Now this is the far northwest end of the Fairgrounds, and that is another one of the entrances. And this big tent right here is holding the Mardi Gras floats for the parades. They have a few parades every day, and each day at the Big E is in honor of something, whether it's a city or town, like they have West Springfield Day and Agawam Day and Holyoke Day. And during that time, high school bands from those particular towns will come, and they also have like New Hampshire Day, and they'll have Maine Day, and so bands from those particular communities will come, and they'll play in the parades. And they also have dignitaries from those areas come, and they're part of the parades, and it's a lot of fun. The parades are nice. And at the very end of each parade are the Mardi Gras floats. And you can pay money to get on one of those Mardi Gras floats and throw beads out at the crowd. So there's another information booth in front of us. And that steeple you see is part of Storrow Village, which will be our next big stop. I want to walk up this way a little bit first, though, because I want to show you something, as I always like to do. There's the Avenue of the States again, where we just came from. In front of us is the Circus Museum, and I remember that fondly from when I was a child. However, this is the last year that the Circus Museum will be at the Big E. They're taking it out at the end of this run. So I want to take you through there and sort of document it for posterity. This little place, the little log cabin that you see, has these beautifully crafted little houses that are basically little incense buildings that have little lights in them and little figures. Appropriate being next to here. This whole thing is an homage to circus history, and much of what you see here was handcrafted by the people in those pictures up there. So you see Clyde Reynolds and Ron Richards, the two of them, and they're beautifully sculpted. So there are not only these exhibits along the wall, but as you saw when we came in, there's this rather large box in the middle of the room, and this houses a big circus area, just the way it would be in the turn of the century. It also has a little model railroad there with a trolley that runs around the tracks. Pretty fascinating to look at, and the amount of craftsmanship and time that went into building this is mind-blowing. Over here is a display by Warren Renault, who's a local artisan who makes these beautiful recreations of antique amusement park rides. There goes the trolley. And this display is an homage to all the performers, the great performers who were in circuses for many, many years. But wait, there's more! In a whole other little section in a different room over here, there's another setup. I always found this amusing. All of the circus workers waiting for their meals. And then all the kitchen staff over here preparing.
It's Taco Tuesday night. That's what they have.
And then more of the rail wagons here. And other performers. Really nice displays. And here are some actual costumes from some of the performers. And they have a video showing some of the acts. So I'm going to miss that. I really enjoyed that exhibit. I don't know what's going into that building, but I assume it's going to be more vendors. So this is where it gets a little dicey to figure out where to take you, but I think I'm going to take you back this way and past the information booth and around the corner into Storrow Village so you can see how that's laid out. And then we'll pop out onto another one of the streets and then pop back into a different section of Storrow Village. Over here is yet another beer garden. You just can't get enough beer. These parking spaces that you see going down the Avenue of the States are often occupied by antique cars. That's a nice shot of the architecture in those buildings, the state buildings. They're really nicely done. The yellow building you see in front of us is Storrow Tavern, which for many years has been a popular local eatery. It's usually open year-round, not just for the Big E, but it's a very nice restaurant. So here we go into Storrow Village, where there were lots of buildings from areas around Massachusetts and New England that were saved and recreated here. You can see they have some historical displays of people actually doing what they do. There's a gift shop. There's a church where you can go in, and it's a real saved church from New England. There's a little schoolhouse where they actually have performers dressed in period costume talking about what it was like back then and how people were educated. So it's a really nice historical exhibit. This big green area is usually occupied by people watching the various shows that go on here. You see where the gazebo is down the end. They have a puppet show there. That's going to be going on in a little while. Over here, here's another exhibit. And they have historical markers for the different buildings telling you where they rescued it from and when it was originally built. There's the actual entrance to the tavern, and there's the puppet show. Looks like the children are worshiping the puppets. Okay, so from here, let's pop back outside onto Commonwealth Avenue. In front of us is the Sea Barn that we saw earlier, and the Grange building is over there. The Avenue of the States would be over on our right. So we're going to take a look at some of the vendors that are lined up along Commonwealth Avenue here. As you would expect from the name Captain Nemo's, they have seafood there, but they also pretty much have every other kind of food you can imagine. And speaking of food, here we go. Food, food, food everywhere. One thing that has always stuck with me from the Big E is the smell of grilled peppers and onions, which you smell everywhere around the whole fairgrounds. And I wish somebody would make a candle with that scent. It's just such a delicious smelling scent. So here we go into Craft Commons, which is another part of the Storrow Village area. And it's basically, as you would guess, a craft fair. So people with all sorts of little crafts to sell. It's a shame that Cicero, New York, no longer has any cows. Well, I guess one. And Laser Bob. And nothing says craft fair like a pickle. And this is the indoor portion of the craft common. Lots of jewelry and beautiful trinkets in there. So as we head out from Craft Common, it'll bring us back to the Storrow Village area where we just were. That's the little schoolhouse in front of us. Over down here and to our left would be the puppet show. That's Storrow Tavern over on the left. And you can see the Avenue of the States in the distance. This is a gorgeous blacksmithing shop. This also has an interesting aroma when they're heating the coal in there to pound the iron. It has a really interesting scent to it. The Nut Lady. And a lot of these vendors, it's really interesting. They come back year after year and you see them in the same place year after year. So they must do pretty well because they always come back. In front of us now is the famous Firehouse restaurant run by the West Springfield Fire Department. Good food in there. There's the Circus Museum down there on the right where we came from. And there's Lost and Found. So right now we're on what's known as Hamden Avenue. Now in front of us on the right is the final building that we have not gone in yet, the New England Center. So we'll take a peek in there. And there are cinnamon buns there, and they are huge. So once again, as you can see, lots of vendors lining this street. The yellow tents way at the end are more animal rides for kids. But for now, let's take a detour into the New England Center. As you can see, this houses a lot of the typical country fair exhibits like quilting, photography, things that people put into contests at fairs. But probably its biggest popular attraction at this fair are those two things, the Big E Cream Puffs and the Big Eclairs. That's heavily advertised and promoted in all their marketing, and that's what brings them into this building. But here you have lots of, photography, these are all judged in contests, and quilting and sewing and crocheting and all that stuff. So now we'll go back out onto Hamden Avenue. And there are the other animal attractions I was talking about. The giant pig, and then more little animal rides in there for kids. And up here on the left is another one of the main entrances to the park off of Memorial Avenue. In front of us is the Brooks Building, which is the administrative building for the entire Eastern States Exposition grounds. And that brings us over to the Court of Honor stage again. This tent is new this year. It used to be just open, so if it were raining, wouldn't get many people there because they wouldn't want to get soaked, and the performers weren't too thrilled about it either. So they put this massive tent here, and there are shows that go on all day long. There are oldies acts like the Cowsills or Pure Prairie League, and there are also some local acts that perform here as well.
We'll try one more. Another 2-digit. This time higher. Digits difference. Please don't say a word on high. Put it over your screen. Now. That's
So as more people begin drifting into the fairgrounds, we're concluding our tour of the Eastern States Exposition. As you can see, there's plenty to do. There are people who come from out of state and stay here for a few days to experience it all. So if you're ever in the New England area during the middle of September through the beginning of October, it's worth checking out. It's a beautiful traditional fair on a very big scale with plenty to do for the whole family. So come on down to the Eastern States Exposition in West Springfield, Massachusetts.